Yeah, let's look at that. Let's look at that. The judgments of God and the absence of God. So what we call the judgment of God is not the fury of an angry deity. It's the silence of a sovereign one. It is the withdrawal of his guidance when we insist on our own. See, God's judgment is not thunder and fire. It's a vacancy of his counsel in the decisions of man. Romans 1:28 puts it plainly like this. It says, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, he gave them over to a reprobate mind. So we need to understand that this isn't rage, this is release. God gave them over, not in wrath, but in absence. In theological terms, this is what we call a metonymy, where that word means that God actually did nothing. He did nothing. He simply allowed. They believed what they wanted to believe. They followed their own gospel, their own ideologies, and a result, judgment by consequence, not by command. So see, there's no wrath in God the way man imagines it. Wrath is not some kind of divine emotion that God has. It is the natural outflow of divine disengagement, the chaos that ensues when a man who's a free moral agent chooses to operate outside the architecture of God's will. So what happens? We blame God for what he never offered. We call consequence punishment, right? When God steps back, the world steps in, and then we become prey to our own passions, and then we name that wrath. So the question is, do you have the spiritual aptitude? Do you have that spiritual aptitude to perceive what Scripture actually means when it says the wrath of God? Can you rightly divide doctrine from drama? Because the Spirit cannot be rightly divided through your presuppositions. You can't fit the kingdom into a container of your worldview. You got to kind of clear that slate, wipe the board clean, and let God define the terms. To partner with the will of God is to submit to the mind of God, to understand his movement and even his non-movement, as a matter of fact. This is all an indicator of his authority. So from the very beginning, we even see in the Bible that this was a test that was going on. God had said to Adam, in the day that you eat of the tree, you will surely die. But Adam didn't perceive death as God did. He expected a biological cessation, right? But God was speaking of covenantal separation, right? A covenant. The covenant that he established was now he was separated. So death in God's vocabulary is a disconnection from his essence. To be outside of him is to be dead, even if your body still breathes. So even Satan the deceiver didn't grasp death that God described. So understand, if God's concept of death was misunderstood by the serpent, who was more wiser than any beast of the field, it wasn't understood by the man or by the woman. What makes us think that we can interpret his judgments without revelation? So to be separated from God is to be dead. And if we are dead in him, we are only alive to another. We're slaves to a foreign master, so to speak. This is why rightly divided word is not just an exercise in study. It's an exercise in surrender. Because the greatest error isn't in just misreading the text, misreading Scripture. It's in misrepresenting God. That's the greatest error.